Magic the Gathering, the thing that separates nerds from geeks. Anyone who has played this game has taken their first step into the depths of deep nerddom. Just like with all things nerdy, it's a game with considerable depth, lore, and rules to it that a normie would flee in terror or lose interest because they are weak and they will not survive the winter. For those who are not, usually we had a friend who taught us how to play, and it's actually pretty simple, or we learned it the hard way and it is not very simple. Even though playing itself is pretty tough, to enjoy it you really do not need to know much. And that is exactly what we will cover today, just the basics you need to know to enjoy the gameplay of MTG Arena. The first thing you need to know to enjoy watching Magic is that every card has a cost that is shown in mana on the top right corner of the card. As you have figured from that term, you are playing as sort of a lizard wizard with a gizzard, also known as Planeswalker. This cost is often shown in color or a number. I'm talking about the mana cost, not the lizard wizard cost, obviously. Some cards, of course, do not have such a cost. They're pretty rare. The ones that aren't land, of course. Now, the other ones are called land, which is what players use to generate that aforementioned mana to pay for the cost of that spell. While players can play any amount of cards from their hand, they can only play one land per turn. There are some effects that allow them to play more or simply bring more lands from their deck onto the battlefield, which are called ramp cards, because they ramp up your mana and allow you to cast even more expensive and often stronger spells. When you look at lands, you will notice in their description that they can oftentimes give a different color of mana. Higher level players can use this information to gain other information about the player's deck and their playstyle, since every color has a certain things that they can or cannot do, which are called color identity. In time, as you watch and play, you will learn what those are. Outside of what those colors represent in terms of philosophy, they all have certain, abilities, certain things that they specialize in. While the list of that is pretty extensive, there are general heuristics on what you can expect from a certain color in terms of gameplay. For example, if you see red, you can expect fast and aggressive creatures and lots of direct damage spells. When you see blue, on the other hand, you can expect counter spells, return to your hand, draw card spells. And black, for example, is outright kill or exile the target, being the color of death and all that. Conversely, white is healing and exiling creatures that are tapped, or exile for a period of time, after all, arrest being the moral way of removing things apparently. Green, you can expect to see lots of big creatures and faster mana generation, as well as spells that make things bigger or make one creature fight another. That way they kind of have removal spells, but not in a direct way. This is why most decks are named after their color combinations, and multiple color combination gaining special names, such as two-color decks getting names after Ravnica guilds associated with those two colors, even though the deck itself may use very few two-color spells such as Zari, mid-range that is going around. One other thing you will see quite often in the commentaries are playstyles, which are numerous. However, from what I have played, they can be put in three major categories, with each having a sub-variation on their winning strategy. Basically, all three of these styles focus to peak at a certain point in the game, but the way they get there can be different, and is up to the players how they build their deck and how they use their cards. For example, while an aggro player would want to throw in the sweet creature they have in their hand as soon as possible, a control player will hold on to that creature and would more often choose to do nothing on his turn in order to make sure that creature hits the field and stays on the ground to do its job for as long as possible. All these three playstyles can use just about any color combination and are mostly limited by the cards in the format that support their style. So even though blue is most often associated with control, you can see a lot of mono blue aggro decks with flyers and unblockable cheap creatures backed up by their counterspells. So let's break down those playstyles. So those 3 playstyles are as follows. First, we've got the aggro. This style is all about taking down your opponent as soon as possible, gain momentum early on, and drive it for the win. The question becomes how they're going to do it. Most often, it employs lots of cheap creatures with aggressive abilities such as Menace, Haste, sometimes even unblockable. However, it can get quite interesting too, combined with protecting your creatures with counter spells and additional draw power. Some decks like to use tokens, others burn spells, but strategy overall remains the same. Kill the opponent before you run out of fuel for your engine. That fuel can be your cards, your board state, or the combination of both. In general, this playstyle is considered easiest among most people because the sequencing you have to do is pretty minimal. However, it all depends on your deck complexity and your opponent. If you are expecting your opponent to have a board wipe, you might want to save your creatures, hence why this game is so great. Even allegedly simplest playstyle can be very deep indeed, especially on higher and higher levels. Now the control is the complete opposite. It's the complete opposite of aggro, and this playstyle focuses on surviving long enough that their most powerful spells and creatures will be able to work. Control oftentimes employs draw card and discard mechanics and tries to exchange card for card, because their later useful cards are worth so much more and oftentimes can finish the game on their own. These are the type of decks that employ fewest amount of creatures and can have the strangest win conditions out there. In the older rotation, you can often see this card called Approach of the Second Sun, which, if played for the second time, just win the game, like it literally says on the card. There are even the ones that are mill decks, which are all about making your opponent put cards from their library to exile or to graveyard. These types of decks are often pretty hated because the game itself begins to take so long. I myself like to play control, even though it can really drag the game out, but the mind games and tricks are completely worth it. The satisfaction of your opponent playing their very expensive Planeswalker, and then you play your Immortal Sun with their deck having no more ways of removing it is priceless. There are lots of variations, as well as for styleless gameplay. It just generally tries to stall the game and towards the late game, and after the turn 6 or 7, you will start seeing the game turn in their favor, where they will be bringing their big guns. From what I have played, this is not a very new player-friendly playstyle because it requires you not only to know a lot of the combinations in the format, but also proper responses to them, since you will be reacting to them accordingly, and a very small mistake can certainly lead to a loss, while a similar mistake, like a mistake of a similar caliber, can be overlooked in other playstyles. On highest levels though, even the teeny tiniest mistake can cost you the game. I know, and it had exactly what happened in PPTQ, and these things are just crazy. You have to see it to believe it. Now, the third type of playstyle is mid-range, and as the name suggests, this type of deck is the one that focuses to win at the mid-game, either out-aggroing the control player or out-controlling the aggro player. One example I heard for this style is, at least an explanation for this style, is that it flies below the control decks and flies above the aggro decks. Its strategy can differ quite a bit, but it is mostly focused on generating as much value as possible. It will have some early play cards that are not really there to do direct damage, but to draw more cards, or do something else entirely, gain life, or just do something really cool, but not necessarily just kill the opponent as soon as possible. It oftentimes uses a lot of control cards as well, but with a mix of damage-dealing creatures that are very efficient in what they do. This type of deck usually has an answer to both types of playstyles in a way that annoys them the most. Against aggro, it will have effective board wipes. Against control, it will have hand disruption and counterspells. Personally, thanks to its general versatility, it is my favorite playstyle, but I've been experimenting with control to challenge myself with its unforgiveness and complexity. However, all three of these styles are oftentimes viable and desired in the meta of the game. Like, if you look at tournaments, you will see all three of these, and would be very wrong to say just because something is easier to play, it is weaker, especially in a deep game like this. There is another style of play, of course, which is the combo style, so that I don't get drowned in the comments saying, "Oh, you forgot the combo, you forgot the combo." It is a little too weird, and I want to save it to a specific game when I encounter it, in game which I have a few times in Standard. That style is hilarious, but quite rare these days. It's something to keep in mind before I'm bombarded with the obvious comments, though they're not as hated as Control because nothing is as annoying as getting all of your spells countered for 2 or 3 mana every time you cast it. Frankly, the last two things you need to know that the goal is to get the opponent's life total to 0, or to have them run out of cards. And that, as a beginner, the whole game really boils down to 1. Pay the mana cost and do what it says on the card. If it has numbers underneath, it's probably a creature which you can use to attack or block during your turn, and the rest are just flavorings around the simple yet effective core. I mean, the way I was taught how to play this game, okay, you have this mana, your goal is to kill your opponent, you play these cards and do what it says on them. Also, there are creatures. That was my starter. After a few dozen games, I was getting the grasp of the whole thing quite well, and it's the depths of the game started revealing themselves. Now, we could also get into the types of spells, instant sorceries, but we'll be talking about those during our commentary to add element of surprise for new players and a refresher for the experienced players. And that was all I had as a simple guide, and we will see you next time.